What kind of man raises a blade against the most powerful figure of his age, believing he is defending order rather than destroying it? What kind of conscience turns loyalty to law into betrayal of blood? Before Rome became an empire, it began to collapse quietly, not through armies, but through admiration, comfort, and surrender to one man's will. And at the heart of that moment stood Marcus Junius Brutus, not a tyrant or a conqueror, but a thinker shaped by memory and restraint, praised for virtue, yet remembered for violence. A man whose name became a question history still asks, whether conviction can survive the moment it chooses force, and whether the most tragic choices are born not from hatred, but from calm certainty. Brutus was born into a name that carried memory like a warning, a household where the past was not honored quietly, but expected to be continued. His family traced its identity to the overthrow of kings, and from childhood he absorbed the belief that freedom was fragile and always under threat. His father's violent death during political unrest shattered any sense of safety early. Teaching him that Rome was governed by power more than fairness, the house grew restrained rather than warm, and his mother Servilia shaped her son through discipline and expectation. Not affection, Brutus learned to master silence, to hide emotion, to observe rather than perform. While other noble boys trained to impress crowds, he withdrew into study, finding refuge in philosophy and structure in thought. Greek tutors introduced him to Stoic ideals of self-control, duty, and obedience to moral law, and these ideas became the foundation of his identity, shaping his severity, his reputation for honesty, and his intolerance for excess. He entered youth with few friends but deep bonds, most notably with Cassius, whose sharper ambition and restless nature contrasted with Brutus' restraint. Their friendship was marked by respect and tension, trust and disagreement. And even then Cassius recognized Brutus' symbolic power. During these years, Julius Caesar became an unavoidable presence in Brutus' life, not as a distant statesman but as a personal force. Caesar's close relationship with Servilia cast a long unspoken shadow over Brutus' household, and Caesar's protection of Brutus during political conflict created a bond of gratitude and obligation. Caesar spared him when others were punished, advanced his career, and treated him with a warmth that blurred the line between patron and father figure, binding Brutus emotionally even as his philosophy warned him against dependence on any one man. As Brutus entered public life, he earned a reputation for strict justice, refusing bribes others accepted easily, unsettling colleagues who relied on compromise. And in his private life he married Portia, daughter of Cato, forming a union grounded in shared republican belief rather than comfort alone. Portia understood Brutus' silence and sensed his growing inner struggle, and when he attempted to shield her from danger, she confronted him with strength rather than fear, proving her resilience through pain to show she could endure both suffering and secrecy, binding Brutus' personal life to his political destiny. And as Caesar's power expanded and Rome's old restraints weakened, Brutus found himself increasingly divided. Loyal to the man who had protected him, yet devoted to a republic that seemed to exist more in memory than reality. Standing at the edge of a path where every step forward would demand sacrifice, not yet knowing how high the cost would be, or how deeply it would reshape his life and Rome itself. As Brutus matured into public life, Rome itself was changing pace. The city no longer moved according to tradition, but according to momentum. And Julius Caesar was at the center of that acceleration. His victories abroad brought wealth, loyalty, and legend back to Rome. Soldiers followed him with devotion, citizens admired his generosity, and institutions slowly adjusted themselves around his presence. Brutus watched this rise from close proximity, serving under Caesar, accepting offices and honors that carried prestige but also silence. Each advancement deepened the contradiction within him, because gratitude demanded loyalty while philosophy demanded distance. Caesar did not rule through fear, but through affection. And that made resistance more difficult. Rome felt stable again, safer, proud. Yet Brutus sensed that stability built on one man's will was fragile. Laws bent to necessity, emergency powers extended without clear end. And the Senate's authority softened into approval rather than judgment. Cassius grew increasingly vocal in private, warning Brutus that Rome was drifting toward monarchy in everything but name. Their conversations sharpened over time, moving from observation to concern, from concern to urgency. Cassius spoke with frustration and bitterness. Brutus replied with caution and restraint, insisting that intention mattered, that Caesar's mercy distinguished him from tyrants of the past. Yet even as he defended Caesar aloud, Brutus felt doubt tightening inwardly. Signs accumulated quietly, statues crowned like kings, honors offered and refused publicly, yet accepted in effect. Power concentrating without resistance because comfort dulled fear. And Brutus began to realize that tyranny need not announce itself violently. It could arrive gently, welcomed. Brutus' internal struggle deepened as he tried to reconcile affection for Caesar with loyalty to the Republic. He feared not only Caesar's dominance but his own weakness. The possibility that gratitude and comfort were shaping his judgment. Nights grew restless. Philosophy no longer soothed him but interrogated him. Texts on duty and virtue offered no escape, only harsher clarity. Cassius and others began approaching him more deliberately. Not with demands but with reminders of his ancestry, of his public image, of what Rome would expect from a man named Brutus if liberty truly stood threatened. Anonymous messages appeared, appeals written as if from the people themselves, suggesting that history was watching, that silence itself had become a choice. Brutus resisted longer than most, not out of indecision but fear of moral collapse. He understood that once violence was justified in the name of principle, there would be no safe boundary left. Yet he also understood that inaction carried its own cost. As Caesar accepted titles that blurred the line between magistrate and monarch, Brutus felt the ground shifting beneath him. The republic he loved existed increasingly as an idea rather than a system. And slowly the question ceased to be whether Caesar intended to be king and became whether Rome had already allowed it. Standing between friendship and fate, Brutus began to sense that his life was narrowing toward a single irreversible decision. One that would demand the sacrifice of personal loyalty for abstract law. And as pressure closed in from all sides, he moved closer to the moment that would define him forever. Not yet with certainty, but with the growing realization that history was no longer waiting for him to decide. It was already moving through him. The conspiracy did not begin with oaths or daggers, but with silence. With looks held a moment too long and conversations that ended just before their meaning became clear. Brutus did not seek the plot, it gathered around him slowly. Senators came not to persuade, but to confirm what they already believed. That if resistance was to carry legitimacy, it must pass through him. Cassius pressed harder now, no longer speaking in hypotheticals but in warnings, telling Brutus that Caesar's refusal of the crown meant little when power already rested in his hands, that Rome was forgetting how to govern itself. That delay itself had become surrender. Brutus listened without answering, because his conflict was no longer about Caesar's intentions, but about Rome's weakness. He read philosophy not for comfort, but for judgment, measuring himself against ideals that allowed no compromise, convincing himself that tyranny was not defined by cruelty, but by permanence, and that a state ruled by one will, however gentle, was already lost. Porcius sensed the weight crushing him, his restlessness, his distance, the nights spent awake. And when he tried to protect her through silence, she confronted him with resolve, demanding truth not for curiosity, but for shared endurance. Her strength did not ease his burden, it deepened it. Because now every choice carried not only political consequence, but personal cost. Brutus agreed to the conspiracy reluctantly and conditionally. insisting there be no bloodshed beyond Caesar himself, no guards killed, no purge afterward, believing that restraint would preserve moral clarity. An illusion perhaps, but one he needed to move forward. The days before the Ides of March passed with unbearable tension. Omens reported, rumors spread, Caesar warned and reassured in equal measure. And Brutus moved through Rome with calm discipline, masking inner turmoil. On the morning of the Senate meeting, fate narrowed to a single room, a single moment. Caesar entered unaware or unwilling to believe danger still possible, surrounded by men he trusted. And when the signal was given, the blades rose not in chaos but coordination. Caesar resisted briefly, then fell. And when he saw Brutus among them, disbelief replaced fear. His final look cut deeper than any wound. And in that instant Brutus felt the full weight of what he had done, not triumph but irreversible rupture. The Senate floor, soaked in blood, did not feel like liberation, but like silence before a storm. Brutus stepped forward, speaking of freedom restored, of law reclaimed, believing words could still guide meaning. But Rome did not respond with gratitude. It recoiled in shock, confusion, grief, and fear. The act meant to preserve order had shattered it. And as the conspirators left the chamber, believing the Republic saved, Brutus already sensed that history had moved beyond intention, and that the moment he chose force, control over outcome had slipped from his hands forever. In the days that followed Caesar's death, Brutus discovered that removing a man was far easier than removing what he represented. Rome did not awaken restored, but wounded, confused, and angry. The Senate hesitated. The people waited, and fear filled the spaces where authority once stood. Brutus believed reason could still prevail, that explanation could calm the city. And he addressed the crowds not with spectacle, but with restraint. Speaking of liberty and law, insisting the act had been necessary. For a moment, the city listened in uneasy silence. But silence was not consent. Mark Antony understood what Brutus did not. That Rome grieved before it reasoned. Antony's funeral speech did not argue, it revealed. Displaying Caesar's wounds, naming each betrayal. Reminding the crowd of Caesar's generosity, his victories, his mercy. And grief turned to fury with terrifying speed. Mobs formed. Houses of conspirators were attacked. Fires lit the night. And Brutus realized that moral logic collapses when emotion takes command. Forced to leave Rome, he departed not as a liberator, but as an exile, carrying the crushing realization that his careful restraint had failed to shape the narrative. In the eastern provinces, Brutus gathered support slowly, relying not on charisma but reputation. Men followed him because they trusted his integrity, even if they doubted his judgment. He raised armies not to conquer, but to survive. Still framing his cause as defense of the Republic, yet Rome hardened under new power. Antony allied with Octavian, Caesar's heir. And together, they moved with speed and ruthlessness Brutus could not match. Proscriptions followed, enemies listed and executed. Fear used openly as policy. And the Republic Brutus claimed to protect was being reshaped without him. War became unavoidable, not as a clash of visions, but as exhaustion of alternatives. At Philippi, Roman faced Roman in battles heavy with irony and loss. Brutus fought with discipline, but without illusion. Understanding now that philosophy offered no shield against momentum. Initial success gave brief hope, but it dissolved quickly. His ally Cassius fell by suicide, believing defeat complete. And Brutus felt the terrible weight of leadership settle fully upon him. Command without certainty, responsibility without control. Pressing forward not because victory seemed possible, but because surrender would empty every sacrifice of meaning. And as the final defeat closed in, Brutus understood that the world he fought for no longer existed, even in theory. Yet he remained consistent to the end, choosing death over capture. Asking a loyal companion to steady the blade as he fell upon it. Not in despair, but in acceptance. believing that a free man must choose his end when all other choices vanish. And with his death, the last organized resistance of the Republic ended, not with restoration, but with silence, leaving behind a question history would carry forward long after Rome itself transformed beyond recognition. Brutus did not vanish with his death. His body fell on a battlefield, but his name entered memory where it would never rest. Rome moved forward into empire with startling speed. Octavian would become Augustus, power would settle into permanence, and the Republic Brutus died defending would survive only in ceremony and nostalgia. Yet his act refused to fade quietly. Even his enemies struggled to define him. Antony is said to have called him the noblest Roman of them all, not because he approved of the murder, but because he believed Brutus alone acted without malice. History itself seemed uncertain how to judge him. Some saw a traitor who shattered stability and unleashed chaos. Others a tragic idealist who chose principle over life. Poets and writers returned to his story again and again because it resisted simple verdicts. Brutus was neither monster nor hero in the common sense. He was a man who believed ideas could command history and discovered too late that history obeys no single mind. His greatest flaw was not cruelty or ambition, but faith. Faith that moral clarity could survive violence. Faith that restraint could control consequences. Faith that people would value law over loyalty. His life exposed a hard truth Rome would live with for centuries: that systems collapse not only when attacked, but when they are loved too abstractly. Brutus loved the Republic more than the Romans who lived within it. And in doing so, he misunderstood the force that truly holds societies together: emotion, identity, belonging. Yet his failure does not erase his courage. He accepted the cost of his convictions without retreat, without excuse, choosing death rather than compromise. And that consistency is what keeps his memory alive. Long after emperors fell and statues crumbled, Brutus remained a question rather than an answer. A reminder that power and principle are rarely aligned, that moral certainty can be as dangerous as ambition, and that the most haunting figures in history are not those who sought domination, but those who tried to stop it and discovered that time itself does not pause for virtue. It only records the attempt, leaving future generations to decide whether Brutus was a warning, a sacrifice, or simply a man who stood at the wrong moment between love and law and chose the one he could not live without. With centuries of distance, the noise of Rome fades, and what remains is the stillness of Brutus' choice. Stripped of banners, crowds, and accusation, leaving only a man standing alone before an irreversible moment. History did not pause to ask whether he was right, it simply moved on. Building an empire on the ruins of the Republic he tried to preserve. Yet Brutus endures because his failure was honest, because his struggle was internal before it was political, and because his life forces an uncomfortable reflection on the nature of power itself. Rome did not fall because one man seized control. It fell because many accepted that control in exchange for peace. And Brutus stands as the embodiment of resistance to that quiet surrender, even as his act accelerated the very transformation he feared. Time transformed him into symbol, invoked whenever tyranny is debated, whenever law collides with loyalty, whenever violence is justified in the name of principle. And still his story refuses to settle, because it offers no clean lesson, only tension. Between intention and outcome, between moral clarity and human reality. Brutus reminds us that conviction does not guarantee wisdom, that virtue does not control consequence, and that history is shaped as much by emotion as by ideals. Yet he also reminds us that some individuals will accept isolation, hatred, and death rather than abandon what they believe to be right. And in that willingness lies his enduring power, not as a hero to imitate or a villain to condemn, but as a mirror held up to every age that must decide how much it is willing to sacrifice for order, how much violence it will excuse for stability, and whether the law is strong enough to stand without the comfort of obedience. Brutus' life ended on a battlefield far from Rome, but his question never left the city. It passed into memory, into literature, into political thought, lingering wherever power gathers and conscience hesitates. And in the end, history does not answer him. It leaves him standing there, forever suspended between love and law. A reminder that the most lasting legacies are not empires or victories, but unresolved choices that continue to trouble the silence long after the swords have fallen still. In the long shadow that followed Rome's transformation, Brutus became less a man and more a presence, invoked in whispers and writings whenever power threatened to outgrow restraint. His life replayed not as a sequence of events, but as a dilemma that refused resolution. Emperors ruled with authority he feared, citizens accepted stability he doubted, and the world moved forward without the republic he loved. Yet his name endured because it carried unease, because it asked whether survival is worth the price of silence, whether peace purchased through submission is still peace. History did not vindicate Brutus, but it did not erase him either. Instead, it preserved the tension of his choice, the image of a man who believed that ideas mattered enough to die for, and discovered that death does not guarantee their survival. His story reminds us that power reshapes memory as easily as it reshapes law, that victories write history, but failures give it depth, and that the past is not a teacher offering clear answers, but a mirror reflecting our own uncertainties. Brutus stands there still, not celebrated, not forgiven, but remembered. A figure caught between devotion and destruction, between private love and public duty, between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. And perhaps that is why his legacy endures. Because as long as societies struggle with authority, loyalty, and conscience, as long as individuals are forced to choose between comfort and conviction, the question that defined Brutus will remain alive, waiting in silence, asking not what history demands, but what the human heart is willing to sacrifice when it believes it is acting for something greater than itself. When all the voices fade and the arguments fall silent, what remains of Brutus is not the act itself, but the stillness that follows it. The moment after conviction has spoken and consequence begins to move on its own. Rome learned to live without the republic, emperors learned to rule without restraint, and generations were born who no longer remembered what Brutus had tried to preserve. Yet his story survived because it was never truly about Rome alone. It was about the human need to believe that right action can control outcome, that purity of intent can master chaos, that a single decision can arrest the drift of history. Brutus lived and died inside that belief, and his tragedy was not that he failed, but that he was sincere. He did not seek power, and he did not flee responsibility. He accepted hatred, exile, and death rather than retreat from what he believed reason demanded. And in doing so, he revealed something enduring and unsettling, that moral certainty can be as dangerous as ambition, and that violence once chosen belongs to history rather than the hand that wielded it. Brutus is remembered not because he won, but because he chose. And because his choice exposes the cost of believing that law can be saved without the consent of those who live under it. Time did not reward him, it absorbed him, turning his life into a question rather than a lesson, and perhaps that is his final legacy. Not an answer carved in stone, but a pause in the flow of history, a space where power and conscience collide, asking each generation in its own quiet way whether order is worth any price, whether loyalty has limits, and whether the hardest battles are not fought on fields or in chambers, but within the private silence where a single human being decides what they are willing to lose in order to remain faithful to what they believe. And in that silence, Brutus still stands, neither condemned nor absolved, only remembered. As history moves forward and leaves the question open, waiting for the next age to answer it. And so the story of Brutus does not end with a verdict, but with an echo, a lingering uncertainty that time has never resolved. Rome gained emperors, stability, and grandeur, yet lost the fragile tension of shared power that Brutus believed defined freedom. History moved forward efficiently once resistance was gone, proving that order is easier to maintain than principle. But ease was never Brutus' measure of worth. He lived in discomfort, chose in doubt, and died without assurance that his sacrifice meant anything beyond his own conscience. And that is why his figure remains unsettling, because he forces us to confront the limits of idealism in a world governed by force and feeling. Brutus reminds us that believing oneself right is not the same as being right, that loving a system more than the people within it can hollow its purpose, and that even the purest intentions can accelerate the very collapse they seek to prevent. Yet he also reminds us that history is shaped not only by conquerors, but by those who resist them and fail. Because failure leaves questions victories cannot silence. His life stands as a quiet testament to the cost of choosing principle over belonging, of standing alone when compromise feels safer. And as centuries pass, his name remains suspended between condemnation and admiration, never settling, never resting, because Brutus was not meant to be resolved. He was meant to be remembered as a man who stood at the edge of history, looked into the widening gap between power and law, and chose to act, knowing the act might destroy him and still believing that not acting would destroy something greater. And in that belief, flawed, human, and painfully sincere, Marcus Junius Brutus becomes less a lesson and more a warning that the struggle between conscience and power has no final chapter, only pauses, and that history does not ask us what is easy. It asks what we are willing to live with once the moment has passed and the silence returns.